RIP to my inbox. Hello, my name is Margaret Adele, and I have been reviewing independently published books for about 3.5 years now. Stumbled into it accidentally, but I'm never leaving. And when I mentioned to some of my indie author friends some of the stuff that can come through in my inbox, they mentioned that, well, there's not a lot of resources in how to directly talk to reviewers to actually get the review, and a resource would be nice, actually. So I decided to sit down and write out a list of notes, do's and don'ts to give yourself the best chance of getting that reviewer to say yes and getting your independently published book out a little bit more into the public eye. Now, some context and a disclaimer before we jump in. Yes, I am only one reviewer. I have been doing this for several years, and if my book siren statistics are to be believed, I am in the top 20% of reviewers of self-published works. However, other reviewers might do things a little differently. I also recognize that because of the size of my channel, I tend to start working with indie authors when they're at the beginning of their careers. Now, I do have some on my review list that are going on to being regularly published and making a living off their work and even selling the screen rights. But I also recognize that a lot of these issues I'm talking about come from indie authors that maybe didn't have the resources or access to resources to actually figure out how to make this work. So if you are one of those authors that said something on my don't list, don't worry. Other people did it too. You can move forward and change things. It's not the end of anything. And no, I don't hold it against anyone that there was a little slip up in an inbox. I literally just want to help indie authors have the absolute best chance of having that reviewer say yes. First up, your review request should come in the form of an email, not a DM sent through social media. Not only do a lot of reviewers find that annoying, but some social media sites like Goodreads actually try and crack down on that kind of thing, and you could get banned. If you don't know what their review email would be, you can usually look on the About or Contact Me page on the blog, on the YouTube channel, on their socials. Worst comes to worse, you could comment on one of their reviews to be like, hey, do you review self-pubbed or indie? What's the email address I should send it to? However, I would definitely try to find that somewhere already and only send that comment if you cannot find it, because most of the time a regular reviewer will have their contact info posted somewhere, and it's a lot more professional if you don't have to ask right out of the gate. Your email should be titled something along the lines of review request for, and then the title of the singular work that you are asking for a review. And I emphasize singular. If you are asking for a review for a book in a series, you need to ask for a single book at the beginning of the series. If you try asking for several reviews for several books in a single email, it's going to look like a giant job, and most reviewers are going to balk and say no. Not to mention the fact that the reviewer won't know if they want to continue with the series until they've read the first book. So pick the book, go with that, ask for only that in a review request. Or, for example, if you have several books of different types of genres, do your best to pick the book that you think that reviewer specifically is going to like, because that will increase your chances of getting a yes out of them. For example, if you are sending a review to me and you have a YA contemporary book all about a young girl that's trying to become popular versus a monster romance set in space, one of those is an insta yes and one of those is an insta no. And OGs on my channel know which one is which. It's the monster romance in space. Regardless, you won't necessarily know everything about that reviewer's tastes, but you can always give their Goodreads, their blog, their YouTube channel a quick look through and get at least a little bit of an idea of what they like reading, and then pick from your books to go with that. And I cannot stress this enough, you pick the single work. It has happened to me a couple times now where an author will send me a link to their entire library, their Amazon author page, what have you, and ask me to pick from their work. Decision fatigue is a thing. I spend a gigantic amount of my life looking through books, trying to decide if I want to read them. I don't want to do it more in review requests. You know your work the best. You need to go through and pick what you think would be the most shining example for review for that reviewer to look over. The more work you ask that reviewer to do, the more likely it is they're going to say no. Now, pulling up my notes here, all of the relevant info that you should be mentioning in your review request are things like the title, the genre, the page or word count, depending on which one is more relevant, the expected publication date, or if it's already been published, the blurb/synopsis. This can be slightly different than what's already been published on the marketing on places like Amazon or Goodreads, but in general, I would only edit it if you specifically know that a certain aspect that already exists in your book would appeal to the reviewer. So for example, if you have an MF romance that on the surface just looks like a hetero romance, but both characters are bisexual, and you know that I, as a reviewer, am bisexual, you could edit the blurb to include that because that would entice me more than just the average, what I would assume to be a hetero romance. You also want to include trigger and content warnings. This is very important, regardless of what you think the reviewer has in the realm of mental health issues. Including a full list of trigger and content warnings goes a really long way to proving your professionalism and also just letting the reviewer know if that's something they'd be into, because sometimes it isn't necessarily a case of this will trigger a panic attack in me. Sometimes it's just a case of I don't really think I want to read that. And if you don't let them know ahead of time and they say yes and review your work and find it in there, it is very likely that you will not get a repeat review from them or a very kind review in the first place. Because remember, you should never be trying to trick a reviewer into reading your work because you've already agreed that they're going to be talking about it on a public platform, and you would really like to not be seen as the author that tricks people into reviewing things they didn't want to read. Now, you should also include things like maybe your inspiration, your muse, and in a world where things like own voices is still relevant, even though, yes, I agree that that specific phrase has been weaponized. It is always important to note either if you are the same member of the demographic that your book focuses on, or what you have done to kind of get to know the demographic that you're focusing on. This does not necessarily mean that you have to do so much research because you have one side character that has one disability. But if it's going to be the center point, you need to be able to explain where all of the inspiration came from and what work you put in to making that the most respectful representation of that demographic that you could possibly make it. And no, I will not accept any arguments about how that limits writer freedom. You're a professional. I expect you to put in the work. Now let's talk about the language in the email. Within the language, there are a couple common sense things. Proofread. Take care of some of those typos and those grammar errors. You are asking a reviewer to look over, say, 300 pages of your work. You should make those 3 paragraphs you're sending them in the email really tight. This isn't to say that reviewers will see a single typo and say no, but if they see a lot of typos, they're going to start wondering what those 300 pages look like if these 3 paragraphs have this many grammatical errors. But more importantly, when you are working on the tone of the email, your end goal should be to make the reviewer think to themselves, this is a professional author with a professionally made piece of artwork. You do not want to use any language that might incite feelings of pity in the reviewer. Things like, this book is my baby, but I just can't get anyone to review it. No. You do not want the reviewer to feel bad for you, because best case scenario, they're only accepting it out of pity and they're not as excited about it, which means the review is going to be really lukewarm. And worst case scenario, they think you're trying to emotionally manipulate them and they get upset. Now, yes, your book might be your baby, but here's the thing. For most authors, their books are their babies. For almost dull authors, and reviewers can't accept all of those books. It's just not feasible, especially when, for most reviewers, this is a hobby that we're not paid for. So you want to entice them on the grounds of the book's own merits and how much they're going to enjoy the book based on what's in it alone. You also want to avoid any emotionally charged language that might lead a reviewer to believe that you won't take it well if you don't get a good review. This could be things like, I poured my whole heart and soul. It's my, my soul opened up on the page. Because as the reviewer, I am sitting there thinking, what if I give this a 3-star? What's going to happen there? And to be fair, you might get a 3-star from the reviewer that says yes. Up till now, I haven't given anything below a 2-star, mostly because I will DNF if I think a review book is leaning towards a 1-star, but I have given as low as 2. And if the reviewer has reason to believe through the language of your book that you're going to react very negatively to those lower star reviews, they are more likely to say no. So your language needs to be professional and in such a way that it can prove to the reviewer that they are safe in their future interactions with you, regardless of what that review looks like. And yes, I understand that pity reviews can sometimes work, but it's usually very short-term success. Reviewers and readers in general are going to lock on more to the books that just look cool rather than the authors they feel bad for. Also in this email, you should state what form the review copy will take. Most of the time, this can be digital, EPUB, MOBI, PDF. Yes, some indie reviewers will prefer physical copies, but for the most part, most indie reviewers understand that it's going to be digital. But it is very crucial that, one, you already know how to do this. You should have your review copies on standby before you send emails. I have had authors multiple times ask for my help in getting the review copies, and that's not my job. And secondly, they have to be free. This is free goods in exchange for free labor. Remember, reviewers normally aren't paid for their work. And even if they have something like a monetized channel, reviews don't tend to make that much money on those channels. It's actually more attention to like the Goodreads or the Amazon pages. And a quick side note here, because this seems to be a common misconception that I've seen among several authors asking for reviews. Kindle Unlimited is not free. The subscription service costs money. So saying, well, it's on KU is not the same as offering a free copy. And no, reviewers will not take to it well if you just suggest that they get a free trial of KU to read your book. It is your job to provide a free copy. And I thought this would be common sense, but yes, I have gotten several authors trying to use KU as their way to get out free copies. It is not the same. A simple PDF, to my knowledge, is fairly simple to get a hold of. But just please, it's free. It's the standard. Now I have my general list of a couple of do's that will help increase the chance that you get a yes to that review request. Things like include a press packet if you have one, the JPEG of the cover, images of other reviews, that kind of thing. You could also include a small little promise of swag if you have it. Don't go overt because swag never turned a no to a yes, but things like, I can send you a physical copy and a couple bookmarks will go a really long way into showing your professionalism because look, I already have all of these materials ready to go for reviewers. Be sure to also include your socials. These should be the links to your author pages, mostly on pages like Goodreads or your Twitter, for example, but be prepared and be aware of what you're posting on there, because if, someone gives me their Twitter profile and I go to it and they're complaining about, well, I just don't see why there has to be 2-star reviews at all, I, as the reviewer, am gonna get a little iffy. Again, you really want to maintain a general positive tone. You might be floundering. You might be getting desperate or feeling really angry that this book that you love just can't seem to reach anyone. and it sucks. But you want to be careful that that doesn't come through in the writing. The author to reviewer dynamic in reviews and in the review space can make or break whether or not you get that yes. Because I know that I'm going to be working one-on-one with all of the authors that email me for a prolonged period of time, the best thing you can do is say that you're good to work with without saying it. Show in your language, in your tone, that you are going to be someone that that reviewer is going to want to have a prolonged working relationship with moving forward. Do offer clear answers to any good faith questions that they have. This could be things like questioning a part of the synopsis that maybe seems a little iffy, or double checking, do you really only want this review if it comes out before publication, or can I go a little bit later? That kind of thing. This kind of question and answer dynamic between authors and reviewers is what makes the reviews more elevated when ARC copies are given out, because I have access to information that the average reader does not, which makes my reviews a little bit more of almost an inside job, because I can say, yes, the author said that this character that has bi vibes is actually a bicon, and that kind of thing. Having that direct connection between authors and reviewers just makes for better content all around, because you as the author will have a greater insight into what some of your readers want, and the reviewer has greater insight for their viewers or readers to know that they will have an inside track, let's call it, to learning more about the books. And this one might only apply to me. I am not sure. But if the reviewer has a review policy, read through it. Mine is always linked in the description beneath the videos. And I can tell very clearly who read it and who did not. So not everyone may have it, but even if it was just a couple like list of do's and don'ts somewhere on their about page, always read through that. It will come through in your emails and increase the chances of a yes. Up next is the quick list of don'ts. Like I mentioned before, don't just post a link to the book or just post the title and genre. The more information you give, the more likely you're going to get that yes. Don't ask for a personal or private review. Reviewers are not beta readers, but I have still had it happen multiple times where someone will give me the entire spiel and be having a great review request where I am like on the verge of saying yes. And then at the very bottom, they'll say something to the effect of, I hope you love it, but if you don't, I'd prefer a private review. That turns that I'm interested in this into an instant no. Now, I, as a reviewer, do my absolute best to make sure that every book I accept for review has the highest possible chance of being a 5-star, but I have still regularly reviewed as low as 2 stars. And you never want the reviewer thinking to themselves, what is this author going to do if I give a low score? Because they will always err on the side of caution and just tell you no, even if there was the chance that they'd love your book and hype it up. You don't have to like negative reviews. You can full on spend entire paragraphs complaining to the group chat. And I highly emphasize group chat, because complaining about it publicly will only harm your reputation. Regardless, you don't have to like it, but you have to accept it as a possible outcome of the process when you begin the process. But also, having an open mind also means that you could find people that really love it. It's just kind of the gamble you have to take. Don't use an arrogant or belittling tone. You, as the author, are not above the reviewer. You are not better than them because you have published the book that they are reviewing. And again, that is the best way to get an instant no. Don't argue or get angry over good faith questions. And I emphasize the good faith questions. I have had authors argue with me over things like, when I ask the demographic questions, they'll be like, well, I just think that's limiting writer freedom. And that, again, instant no. And not only an instant no, but that is an instant no. And the name goes on my will not review list. And I maintain a will not review list. And the number one thing that gets you on that list is not what's in your books. It is how you interact with me. If we have a decent working connection through email, I'll keep reading your 2-star books if I have a chance that they're going to be, the 5-star this time. But arguing with me and using a belittling tone, and for a lot of reviewers it's the same, will shut it down faster than anything else. And also, this last one, I don't think this is a hot take, but just in case, don't just list tropes in lieu of the synopsis. Yes, listing tropes is a practical marketing choice for indie books because indie books, unlike trad books, don't use as many comps in their marketing. You just don't have a lot of indie books reaching that level of fame to use as comps. But I am, again, not a casual reader you are just marketing to on Twitter. I am a reviewer. So you want to give the full list of the book's information instead of just tropes. Now, if you know for a fact that your book has a trope that I love, you can list it, but you'd actually be better off sneaking in those little phrases into the synopsis itself. Like how everyone knows that the phrase ragtag crew of misfits is just synopsis code for found family. So I would include ways to put it in the synopsis that your book has these tropes rather than just listing them out like AO3 tags, at least when you're talking directly with reviewers. Editing Margaret here. I also forgot to add that you really don't want to attach the digital copy at the first email. It's kind of presumptuous, like you just assume the reviewer is going to say yes. Always wait for the response before you send the digital attachment. Up next, how to respond to their response. First up, acceptance. They have accepted your review. What do you do next? This is the fun one. You send them the book. Obviously, if it's a digital copy, you immediately send back an email with a thank you so much, etc. Here is the book, and make sure that it's in their preferred digital copy. And then you wait. And you don't message them to ask if they've read it. And I know this is probably hard because you probably will be waiting months, but you cannot send those DMs because, again, you do not want to look desperate for reviews. Now, the exception to this being, if you have given out a review copy before the publication date, you can give reminders of that date. Just reminder, FYI, we're 3 days out from, review publishing, FYI, today is the publication day. Yay, you can even make it a celebratory post. Keep in mind, though, it is fully possible that the reviewer might not have the review out by that date. Life happens. I have missed many a publication date. It is better to be patient and wait and have that review eventually than to try to push the reviewer and have them say no and have one fewer review. It's gonna suck. It's gonna be agonizing, but you don't want the reviewer to feel like you are metaphorically over their shoulder checking in on them. For me personally, I keep my Goodreads pretty well updated. One of the first things I do when I start or finish a book is update it. So you can always check that or other reviewers' updated lists. But keep in mind that yours is not the only book that reviewer will be looking into. They have an entire list, and others might have taken precedence for one reason or another. And the best thing you can do in this instance is nothing. It's not going to be fun, but it's going to give you the best outcome of a good review. And now it's time for the not fun one. What if they reject your review request? If you choose to respond, you don't necessarily have to. I personally do not expect one. You have to be professional. A polite thank you for your consideration, have a good day, and move on. It is crucial to remember in this moment that that reviewer probably has a giant list of review books, a giant TBR that they're working to get through. And for whatever reason, that specific book and that book alone wasn't a good fit. They rejected and said no to the book, not the author. That door is still open for you to come request a review again later. I have had indie authors that sent me multiple review requests that I said no to, but they finally sent that one book that was just what I was looking for, and it was an instant yes. And you have to be careful to keep that door open. If you argue with that decision, you will not get a yes. You will not argue your way from a no to a yes. If you otherwise insult or belittle the reviewer, now it's a no to the author. The quickest way to get on my will not review list is to argue with me or make it clear that this is not a working relationship that I want to pursue. Like I mentioned before, you can keep sending me review requests and after I've rejected them, I'll still look at the next one. But if I get an inkling that you're going to argue with me and generally be really negative because I said no because I have a dozen other books I need to be reading, then it will be an instant no for all time. It's not fun. It's not great, but you have to accept the no. And definitely don't just send them an email with the digital copy attached anyway, which has happened multiple times. I don't know where they think the audacity was going to get them. I believe it is usually common sense that if someone says, no, I don't want this, you don't shove it in their hands regardless. But that response and maintaining professionalism post that rejection will do nothing but work in your favor moving forward. Because the fact that you acted with grace in that instance, when you come back to that reviewer and they're looking over that next review request, they will remember that. They will remember how well you took it when they said no thank you that last time. And it tells them, hey, if I accept this and I give it a low score, they'll probably be accepting of that too, and it'll make them more likely to say yes, more likely to believe in you as a professional, and more likely to look positively on your books. It sucks. Rejection's awful. If you need to wait out the emotions before you respond, so you can make sure that response is as professional as it needs to be, do it. But responding from a point of anger is never going to help you. Now, of course, all of this is with the belief that the rejection has been done in good faith. It might be done in bad faith, in which case, go with God, have fun. But if you want to maintain that open avenue, you've got to keep it professional. And that is it, my little resource guide for indie authors looking to get reviews. If you are an indie author and there's something I didn't cover, some questions you still have, please comment those down below. If you're a reviewer and you have thoughts and opinions on what I said, maybe from your own personal experience, please comment those down below. I'd love to see them. And I am, in fact, open to review requests. I will have all that information down in the description below. I will probably be expecting a very high level of professionalism from you if you got through this entire video, but I'm excited to see what could pop up in my inbox next. And with nothing else to say, I hope you have a wonderful day and a marvelous tomorrow.